Hello, everybody. Welcome to the New Emancipation Network podcast that we're starting off with a cute little streaming series. This is Jumpsuit Utopia, an exploration of the utopian themes in Star Trek. I am Esri. You might know my previous host, Lexi, who was blown up in a thoughtless experiment because she wanted to basically she was just blown up in a really thoughtless piece of writing because she wanted to join a sitcom. However, I'm here with you, and I'd like to introduce you to a bunch of people that you already know that I'm still just trying to get to know again. Starting from this side, we have Shane from General Intellect Unit.
Heyo.
Hi. We've got Kyle Thompson from GIU.
Hello.
And below me, we have Comandante Alpha, or Tom from Alpha to Omega.
C.
And all the way over that way, we have my precious Sophie from Trans Revolution and from Alpha to Omega reading groups.
Hi.
Oh, hello. So we're doing the brand new Star Trek show, Star Trek Picard, which if we don't use the correct pronunciation this whole time, obviously, we're very bad experts. So I don't know. I think we should start with just a basic roundtable as to how we felt about this. Oh, and one last thing. Red alert! There's just going to be spoilers all up in this bitch because this is the culmination of an entire set of series, of a whole set of franchises. It would be like talking about the rise of Skywalker or something without being like, well, you can't say that, Darth Vader is Luke's father or something. So we're just going to spoil stuff. It's just going to kind of spill frothing from our lips. So we're normally in these podcasts, when we cover an episode, we'll try to not do that. I don't think you could do that with Picard. So
when you say frothing from the lips,
yes,
sorry.
That's a different stream, Tom.
Yes, I'm listening. So why don't we let's see. I think we should start with Shane.
Woo-hoo.
What do you think?
I thought it was interesting. It was refreshing to see. I actually quite enjoyed it, but it was really kind of rough in some places. The production is that kind of very cheap kind of Amazon sort of vibe to it, which I should have expected. It felt extremely rushed. It felt like there was at least 2 episodes worth of content being slammed into this bit. There was at least 2 or maybe even 3 what could have been cliffhanger endings that would have been a full episode's worth of material. So it felt kind of weird that way. The other thing that really stood out to me is just that it's basically the plot of Blade Runner 2049. It's you've got the replicant child and the whole thing of ban on replicants after or synths or whatever the fuck they're called in this, after a synth related disaster and such. So I was initially it looks a lot like the contemporary cyberpunk Blade Runner aesthetic, and then I was and they're riffing on the plot too. That's super interesting. And the other sort of point that jumped out at me was that they're still doing the whole 20th century nostalgia stuff. The music that plays is all from the early 20th century. Picard references Dunkirk or whatever, having as the only touch point anyone knows for war and evacuation, despite 7 centuries of time having passed in between. And there's even that bit where they're explicitly oh, be the captain they remember. And it's a little bit too on the nose for me in terms of dialogue,
Okay, so not loving the nostalgia trip, Shane.
No, it was enjoyable though. I was really tickled by the end of it. I was oh no, this is actually interesting. This is very interesting framing. Yeah.
All right. Let's get Sophie's take on this.
So I really liked it. I don't have an eye for production.
Sophia, your mic just cut out.
You're muted.
You're muted, Sophia. Sophia, you're having a bit of trouble. Kyle, why don't we get your take?
Okay, so I agree with pretty much everything my co-host said. I further have some like kind of like production and aesthetic qualms with the episode. I think like it the show really doesn't display a lot of design confidence, I think. There isn't really a unified aesthetic to what they're doing. So especially the attempt to like frame Dodge as this cyberpunk character and then like basically pull like cyberpunk girl.jpg costume design off the internet and use that for her. It felt like, come on, like, you know, you could do a little bit more to create an aesthetic. And so I think that my main impressions of the show is that they don't have a lot of confidence that Stewart at his age is going to be able to carry a show like this and sustain interest. And so they overcompensate and try to create action and they kick up the music a little bit too much. I also think that, yeah, it's just like they're really not very confident about what Earth should look like, given that this is outside of the Starfleet aesthetic. So they're like kind of like grasping at straws, trying to create something science fiction. And I think that's kind of a weaker side of it. And then the final thing I would say is that like this is the show where the JJ Trek lens flare has been the most irritating to me because it seems really like out of place and just kind of like a common institutional environment. Like why this isn't a starship? Come on. So like yeah, they're really trying to like pull these different aesthetics together to make this show work, but it feels like they just don't have a lot of design direction confidence. And I think more than the plot or the performances, that's really the thing that kind of like rankled me the most about this episode. On the positive side, I would say though that like I do appreciate all the ways they've pulled from the Star Trek canon and like created a like convincing, you know, fanfic scenario for what happens so many years after TNG, right? Like really they're just like, okay, I can see how this all makes sense in the terms of the Star Trek timeline. It feels convincing. This feels like a place that Picard could have ended up.
All right, Sophia. Are you back with us, my dear?
Yes.
Wonderful. How about we get a little sugar with the salt and let us know how you feel about this.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. As I was saying earlier, I don't have that kind of eye for production. I've never seen a J.J. Abrams Trek, and maybe that works to my favor in liking both this and Discovery. I think a lot of people have been kind of poisoned and primed to look at Discovery and Picard in the context of the Abrams movies. And I will watch them eventually, but I'm very grateful I watched Disco and Picard first. I think one of the kind of like worst arguments against New Trek that I've heard is that people just claim that it's like nothing but like pew pew, you know, it's just pew pew sci-fi. There's no like thoughtful philosophical reflection or whatever. And I think what these shows are trying to do is trying to walk that line, because producing TNG now will never work. People need to just let go of that idea. It's just not going to work. And I don't know how much people here hold to that, except for maybe Tom. But joking aside, like I think you can have a thoughtful story and a story arc that goes through the entire season that like raises kind of like good science fiction kind of philosophical questions or ethical questions, and also like have action sequences spliced into that, have like kind of combat and fighting. For example, in this first episode, there was like 2 action sequences, right? Like I don't think that's overdoing it. And I also, what I really liked about this episode in particular was the kind of world building that they do. we've never really experienced a lot of civilian life, as we've talked about in other episodes that haven't been released yet. But we don't experience a lot of civilian life in the Federation. I've never seen what the news media is like in the Federation. And so we get the Federation News Network, which is, it's funny because it's not portrayed in a positive light in this episode.
Fake news. It's the fake news network.
Yes, it really is. But what's funny is that FNN looks more like a CNN analogy than a Fox News analogy for US viewers. And I thought that was really good. It's so easy for these kinds of sci-fi, like pop culture sci-fis, to just kind of get into an analogy of Orange Man bad in this current political climate. And for them to attack the moderate cable news network instead of the right-wing cable news network is really good, I think. But it leads to a lot of questions about how does the media work in this utopian future? Like, is it just like, what motivation does she have to trick Picard into asking why he left Starfleet, a thing he specifically said he didn't want to talk about? She brought it up for the sensationalism. But if this is a post-scarcity society, there's no ratings to motivate that. So my kind of headcanon is that, like, Star Trek is established as not like a money-motivated society, but it is very meritocratic, especially in Starfleet. Yeah. And so if you take that same kind of meritocracy and competitive nature that you find in Starfleet and apply that to cable news that expands across like Federation territory in the galaxy, I'm assuming, which is pretty fucking big, like, you could see how there'd be a similar meritocratic process where if you're a pundit or a journalist like that lady was, and you can get huge ratings, you're not going to get like a huge paycheck because like you have everything you need, but you're going to like rise into ranks, you're going to advance your career. And that you see that similar thing play out in Star Trek. What I also liked was what Shane said about Blade Runner is really interesting. I actually haven't watched Blade Runner yet either, which I know, sin. But I think the thing that kind of saves it from just being a Blade Runner ripoff is what Kyle was talking about as far as like connecting the dots into the established Trek canon. There's an episode where Data goes to like a robotics conference and comes back and tries to create a daughter. And in that episode, she doesn't live very long. But it's established that he wants to have more of his kind. And Dr. Noonien Soong is his creator, his father, is the only person who's been able to produce this kind of android with a positronic neural net, etc. And on top of that, there's an episode where Data meets his mother. And his mother originally was married to Dr. Soong and was a human. But she died tragically before Soong did. And Soong created a human-like android thing. And that technology exists. And assuming there's still some things that need to be filled in, because this is only the first episode. Like, when was this android? When were these androids created? Like, Data died like what 30 years ago in the canon. Like, it's been kind of a long time. So
yeah, blown up by Billy Corgan. Yeah,
right, fucking Billy Corgan. So like, when did he make these androids? You know, where did they go? How did he sneak them off the Enterprise? Like, there's so many questions that need to be asked. And then the last thing I'll say, and this kind of is like my vibe with Star Trek in the context of the real world and like the people what they're thinking when they're producing that. In the late 80s, you have the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's, you know, a dirty secret that Gene Roddenberry was a little bit of a communist sympathizer. And so, you know, Lexi and I have talked about how we think that Roddenberry like doubled down on the utopian.
I'm sorry. Who? I think you're thinking of one of my previous hosts. You know, I'm just still trying to sort out all my names.
Sorry,
a lot of past lives.
She's very Esri. So Esri and I have talked about how, in TNG, the warning was kind of on the wall for the Soviet Union. Then the walls fell, like second season or whatever, like pretty early in TNG. It feels like Gene Roddenberry was really trying to double down on the utopian aspects in the context of like the loss of hope for the left. And we all know, like in history of recent history of Marxism, the 90s were kind of like a low point for Marxism, especially. You see more kind of anarchist-inspired organizing and stuff like that. Even among people who were critical, Marxists who were critical of the Soviet Union, they felt really kind of lost after that, right? So you get Roddenberry presenting not as an explicitly communist utopia, but a utopia. Like, there's still hope, right? Like, that's kind of like, there's no confirmation that's what he's thinking, but that's kind of like my speculation about it, right? And so you get, with Disco and with Picard, you get the context that we're in now, right? In the real world, we have global warming. It seems like we're probably fucked as a species. I'm not trying to overstate that, but you get what I'm saying. You got Orange Man bad, right? You've got like unrest. There's all kinds of crazy shit going on, right? And again, speaking loose, I know people here can be a little litigious, but hear me out. I think that what the writers and the producers are kind of going for is, so big spoilers for Discovery, end of season 2 spoilers. In order to escape a rogue AI in Discovery season 2, they travel 1,000 years into the future. In the trailers for season 3, it's made explicitly clear that in the future they go to, the Federation doesn't exist anymore, right? So we have that. In Picard, this first episode, we see the Federation abandoning the Romulans to get fucked by a supernova. This pundit being like, you wanted to help the enemy, the oldest enemy of the Federation, and Picard's like, no, I wanted to help people who were going to die. Like, so you got some like really fucked up kind of like bigoted vibes. He left because after the synth attack, Starfleet ordered them to abandon the rescue efforts. You have a banning on synthetics. Picard is really disillusioned. And from all the trailers of Picard, it seems like this whole mission is rogue, outside the purview of Starfleet. And what this is signaling, right, is to me, as like a real world analogy, is that society as we know it is changing and it's going downhill, right? And it's reflected that the utopian spark that inspired the Federation is starting to fall apart. And I am a believer in the Roddenberry utopia, but I think problematizing that utopia is a really good and interesting thing to do. And
okay, yeah, I couldn't agree more. We might, unless we want our entire show to be opening monologues, I'm gonna just move along.
Yes.
I think we should, now that we have a nice barrier of sweet, let's really unscrew the top of the shaker and pour on the salt. I want Tom O'Brien, Chief O'Brien, to let loose. What did you think of this new installation in the Star Trek franchise?
Well, I just feel like that excuse me, aesthetically, the Discovery and this have lost the essence of what Star Trek was always about. The idea of, for example, there was no comedy in that episode. Like every Star Trek episode, like the best Star Trek episodes, when I watch them, I usually am bursting my ass laughing watching them, whether it's like Worf or Data or whoever. So there was no comedy, and in fact, it even had mood music. Did anybody notice that? Like it had goddamn mood music in some places. Now, I'm not saying it's the worst ever. I'm not going to go totally to town on it. But like the things I don't like about the aesthetic is different. Like, you just have to look at, say, the fight scene. Like it's like Jason Bourne has poisoned all action movies, right? And it's even got into Star Trek. It's got to Star Trek, where like, you know, this kind of crazy stuff versus like, go look at, I don't know, go look at Worf having a fight or something. They're just absurd. They're ridiculous.
You mean they didn't use like a body double that looks almost nothing like them in like in a wide shot? Yeah.
What's that one that they have with there's one where from the original series where your man is fighting this big alien and they're throwing obviously cardboard rocks at each other and it's in a quarry. It's obviously in a quarry. You know, it's just beyond belief bad. But so like they're going for that high spec like look and feel. But when like it's a thing that for me always made the Star Trek films much worse than the Star Trek series, was the Star Trek film always had to up its game for Hollywood or something. And it lost like a lot of what made the episodes good. And we're kind of going like, it's kind of just, it's done this to another level. Like, you know, I don't think that Star Trek needs high action. You know, people watch, you know, in the recent past, people have watched shows like, what's that one? Breaking Bad, about the slowest paced show of all goddamn time. And people really loved it. So I don't think you have to go for action. But anyway, like, so like, that's my main critique of it. I've got to talk a little bit about Patrick Stewart. Like, how many series are they going to do? How many series is he going to live like in the real world? Like he's looking shook, as they say where I'm from. He's looking hard shook there now. Right? He's his voice is gone. Like the big thing about what made him such a good captain back in the day for me was he had a commanding presence, like a physically commanding presence and a voice. You know, he would go like engage or whatever, like, and you'd feel it. It was like a Shakespearean thing. And now the guy, like, he's like his ass is gone. Like he's wearing a pair of trousers there. He's got less ass than I have. Like the man's in the captain's in trouble.
Is that your main critique? Is that Picard doesn't have enough back in this episode?
Pancake ass Picard. That's
Surely,
what we should name this episode.
I don't know about that. Surely in the future they would have better ass prosthetics for a commanding presence for a former captain.
Absolutely, and that's why I only ever made chief engineer. I never made captain.
Wow. Thank you for giving me optimism for my career.
Okay, I have one more thing to say as well. Sorry. Just when it comes to the comedy element, like when, you know, the comedy element was essentially the same style of comedy in all of them. Even in the original, like Spock's comedy is the same as Data's comedy, is the same as Worf's comedy, blah, blah, blah. But like when we get to Discovery, they have what do you call the red-haired one? The chief science officer. What's her name? Tilly.
She's not a chief. She's like an ensign.
Oh, she's a grunt. Yeah. Okay. So her sense of humor that they've implanted, it's like watching Ally McBeal. It's like they've got Jason Bourne, Ally McBeal, and Star Trek and Star Wars, and put them into a blender. I'm done.
Okay. So let's round out opening monologues with my take on this. I think that, I mean, I really disagree with a lot of what I just heard, not just from Tom, but from Shane and Kyle, mainly because I was struck with how confident this premiere was. If you look at TNG's premiere, Encounter at Farpoint, if you look at Deep Space Nine's premiere, Emissary, if you look at Voyager's premiere, Caretaker, if you look at Enterprise's premiere, Broken Bow, then you look at the Discovery premiere, which I don't remember what those episodes are called. They don't know what the fuck they want to do, like at all. And they have to work it out usually over the course of 2 seasons, 3 with Voyager. You know, TOS was pretty much the only one that arrived with its identity kind of somehow, you know, preloaded. Picard strikes me as that kind of confident effort. And I would say that plot-wise, I would say that stylistically, it seems like they yes, there is a lot of continuity between the Picard production team and Discovery. And then if you look at the Discovery production team, it feeds into the JJ Trek stuff. And then the JJ Trek stuff, JJ Abrams did a bunch of, series on television, like some of which are not like the best, the best quality series in the world, perhaps, like in terms of writing or what have you. And like, yeah, there's a lot of like shared DNA and continuity between like, kind of swill TV and Star Trek. But, that's like a pretty normal. Like if you, look at Enterprise and some parts of Voyager and even the kind of like, schlock syndicated stuff that, like TNG or, would be regularly scheduled with. Like, I feel like because, Star Trek is our like utopianism for like, the Anglo side of the Cold War, like that it's easy to maybe project that this is, this is such a cut above everything else. It's like if you're like a Pink Floyd fan or if you really like classic rock, like all those bands are trying to make some money. Like, and to kind of separate it out is, I think, rose-colored glasses, a bit of wishful retrospective. Now, like, as far as the plot elements go, and I think maybe we could start segueing out of, worst episode ever territory and towards like just analyzing themes, is the really tragic but plausible future of synthetic life in the Federation. I was watching The Measure of a Man recently to reacquaint a friend of mine who's just coming to the series with Bruce Maddox. And yeah, it's like there's an assumption in that episode that, God, the future, wow, we're going to have so many cool life forms. It's going to be so neat. And the way that the case is settled, they think about, potential robot slavery. That's bad. Thank you, Whoopi Goldberg. And then, they're also thinking about like, they're also just thinking about, Starfleet's mission in finding new life. Well, there it sits. There new life is. Like, synthetic life is part of this, big exploratory mission to find new ways of being, new forms of life. And the idea that like a terrorist attack essentially made Starfleet so squeamish about continuing to pursue this like wonderful frontier of creation of like sentience, of intelligence, of life. I think, it resonates with the potential that we have for in our sort of fear of artificial intelligence, in our fear of the T-1000, of control from Discovery, that we might lose the opportunity to become like, to become like creators in our own way. And it's such a plausible trajectory. And again, I'm not really a fan of most kind of sci-fi media, not because I don't like it, I just don't watch it. I've been sort of like reacquainting myself with, I've been reacquainting myself with watching TV and this sort of thing, like through getting into all the old Star Treks. So, if, they took this from that or this, it just all rolls off my shoulders. I don't care. This is the big label name. As far as I'm concerned, everything else ripped it off by going back in time. But like, I think it's a plausible trajectory for the Federation, and it's a tragic trajectory. Like, it seems like such a betrayal of its mission. So when Picard utters that line, when the interview really turns and he says, because it wasn't Starfleet. Because it wasn't Starfleet. Like, it you don't have to have like a rosy picture of, what America or what Britain or whatever country you're living in. You don't need to feel like really attached to your country and have, oh my God, what's happened to America kind of like point of view in order to appreciate like what's been lost in the Federation. Because again, the Federation, way better than whatever shitty country that it's supposed to be an allegory for, right? I mean, it just is.
Totally. Sorry. I was just going to say I'll definitely claw back some of the salt, right? Like I and to kind of riff on Sophia's earlier point, I'm completely on board for the philosophical stuff that they're trying to do with this plot, all the stuff about synthetics and stuff. And I think it jumped out at me that they were sort of riffing on a lot of the similar themes to Blade Runner 2049. And I'm glad that they're doing that, because that is legitimately interesting stuff, and is probably more interesting than like, oh, look, we go out into the stars and look, there's a humanoid species, and they're kind of hard to look at. That's just what the prosthetics are. And that's what the interesting part of the plot is supposed to be. I think this AI stuff and the even the way they do the credit sequence about like the molecular assemblage, and like it builds up to creating an iris, which is a visual motif they use a couple of times throughout the episode. And there's a character called Iris and this sort of thing. I hope that they... to kind of get on like Kyle's thing about like it being kind of aesthetically incoherent, I think it is, but I hope what they're doing is they're going to bin a lot of the Picard Vineyard, Miles Davis, Sherlock Holmes, fucking 20th century riffing stuff, and just switch over to the kind of grungy cyberpunk stuff and the AI aesthetics questions. And maybe hopefully not dwell too much on that kind of thing, because it does feel like they're trying to anchor themselves in two different places, like the sort of nostalgia element of the old school stuff and the like legitimately very interesting stuff that they can start exploring.
Yeah,
I certainly wouldn't say it's the worst Star Trek first episode ever. That's definitely not. I think the Disco first episode was actually better, even though it didn't really indicate where the series was going ultimately, because as you said, they didn't really know what they were doing. But
really hard. Like they switched what show they were going to be kind of mid first season once they got, or like Brian Fuller, the kind of grim dark Game of Thrones things you want to do is not working out. Let's get a new writer's room.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is fine. Like that's all good. I think I'm a Disco defender. But yeah, I still stand by my comments about the design decisions that the show has made. I don't think they're very strong, and I hope that we see going forward that the Frakes directed episodes are a little bit stronger, because I'm not super confident in the direction they've gone.
I gotta push back on that. I love the direction they finally did, like this Disco production values with mostly nice philosophical pacing, kind of slow. The only times that they step it up and they make it breakneck is in the action sequences, where you get the sort of John Woo, like Jason Bourne kind of action sequence. But they're fucking kick ass. Like that's way better than some like really bad like special effects.
I just gotta say too, to push back on the Jason Bourne thing, here's something that's really frustrating about the character of Data from TNG, these androids' father. They portray him sometimes as having superhuman speed and superhuman strength. He lifts a girder by himself. He breaks somebody's weapon. He types super, super, super fast. And then there are other times somebody beams onto the ship and they just kind of stand around like, what? And then they get shot and stunned, and Data doesn't do shit. Where is his super speed then? Like, you can compare it to Jason Bourne all you want, but like this is more consistent. If he's supposed to be so fast and so intelligent and so strong, it's not portrayed consistently in TNG. And I think that's like, people have, like, I love TNG. I would say TNG is like my second favorite Star Trek. That said, there's some things about TNG that are so infuriating, and that's one of them. Like, I think people have super nostalgia for TNG, and it's great philosophically. It's great more with its ethics. Those are the strong points of TNG. But it feels like there's this measuring stick where everything in Star Trek since TNG has to be compared to TNG. It has to be like TNG. And the more you diverge from TNG, the more it's bad in the mind of Star Trek fans. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice with that. And sometimes it's not explicitly people's stated goals, but when you hear the content of their complaints, it's because it's not like TNG. TNG was a great show and super important. And the best thing that TNG did was establish the utopian and kind of took the roots from TOS and the movies and kind of like solidified it into a world. They built the world in TNG. That's important for Star Trek. The ethics and morals, especially the character of Picard, are super important. But as a show, objectively, like, it is really rough at times. Like, the first season is like, you want to talk about bad aesthetics? Like, it looks like TOS. It looks like it was produced in the 60s and it was produced in like the late 80s. Like, it was really, really rough. And just the kind of continuity errors and the sort of bottle episodes that people seem to crave. Like, what these bottle episodes do is like, oh, Data had a daughter. We're never going to talk about that again. And I think that's super problematic. Like, it's super frustrating, you know? And yeah, I don't know. So
Yeah,
I think
okay.
like having, I think Tom did bring up a good point. You don't have to have action sequences for a modern audience. You need that, or you need drama, right? And so I think Disco is going to be more of the action-oriented new Trek, and Picard's going to be a little bit more of the drama-oriented. Maybe I'm wrong. We've seen some trailers that were pretty heavy in the action sequences. I kind of hope that they keep it more slower paced, and they do that because Picard, aka Patrick Stewart, is so old. He needs to just kind of like mosey about and be reflective and stuff like that. He's kind of the moral leadership of the crew, and that the other younger characters kind of take charge of the action sequences. But it's mostly like an investigation, a mystery about what's going on with these androids. How did Data make them? How did Picard just find out about this? Like, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was that weak a first episode. It might more as more of a meta analysis of the style and feel, like the two boys are saying there. But I didn't think it was that bad one. I thought, to be honest with you, I found the pace of it outside of the fight scenes, which were like, you know, super high paced. I found the pace of it quite slow. I was kind of surprised that there was so much kind of dwelling and laying out the plot for future episodes. Not that it was particularly bad or good. It's just like, you know, it was more like a kind of a slow paced show with punctuated with high parts of, you know, action drama. But we'll see how it goes. I wonder what it's like, its overall style will be in the future episodes. I think that it will be quite actiony. I really do think it will be. I think they're going to go for this idea of, you know, large scale battles or something at certain points.
Yeah, that's possible. Like, it does seem like it's going to be a sort of we're getting a crew together and we're going on missions, and it's like maybe not totally like a philosophical, like, you know, armchair, like reflective thing. But I think the themes in the show is that like Picard is not satisfied being like reflecting on everything, because things just aren't going the way they should be. And, you know, there's a sense that he's like, God, I've really been on the shelf. I got to get out there. You know, let's get the crew back together. I mean, not literally, because, you know, yeah. Anyway, I think it's Kyle's turn.
Yeah. Just to take up that point, like regarding Stuart's sort of performance and stuff, you know, I'm more positive on that. I don't think the direction serves him very well in this episode, but he does put in a decent performance. And like, I'm totally okay with this being a show where they're honest about Picard's advanced age, you know? Like, this is a show about an old man. And it's quite honest about that. And like the makeup and everything is very honest about that. Like it's you know, like there's no pulling punches in that regard. It's like, no, this is not the Picard that you grew up with. This is a much older man. And he has an old man's perspective on things. And it's going to be about grappling with those issues instead of grappling with the sort of issues that Picard had at the height of his career. And I think that's good. Like, I think that is actually a strong center for the show, even though it's like, you know, I think there are a little bit of there is a little bit of a lack of confidence in an old man being able to carry a show like this as the central character. So yeah.
Yeah. I do want to steer away from media criticism and more towards the utopian shit or the dystopian shit or the political themes, blah, 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 whatever. But I think that you're right about that. Like, they're making this with someone who's like almost 80. So they're kind of framing the show and shooting it like quick. They already started production on the second season just to make sure they can get everything in just in case. Like, it's cool to have like a show about someone so goddamn old, and have him be like the protagonist and the moral force. He's like a respected, you know, figure, like in universe and out. Although in universe there's like a lot of controversy and sort of suspicion. One of the things that makes people the most suspicious, according to that Federation News Network thing, is that Picard would put so much of himself and so many of the Federation's resources into helping one of the Federation's oldest enemies to save Romulan lives. And like, there's like another weird thing that happens when there's that first raid of those shock troopers. And like, you know, later on, you do see that one of the shock troopers is like Romulan or something. But like in the first raid, like one of the troopers says something in, I think it's either Vulcan or Romulan or some, you know, alien language. And then one of the other shock troopers says to them, "Speak English." Like
it's no Russian. It's no Russian.
It is.
Russian.
Yeah.
But with the appropriate cultural context around it to be like, that's actually a little fucked up.
Did anybody notice in another bit where he said something like, let's behave like civilized men? He said,
oh yeah, in the dream to Data.
That's pretty sketchy as well. Like,
well, Star Trek and colonization, there's always been kind of problems there. But at least there was Star Trek Insurrection. That's a nice anti-colonial message. Although the you know, allegorical colonized people all look like, you know, white people from a J. Crew catalog. But hey, Star Trek.
If Shane, are you leaving and coming back, or are you leaving?
Oh, I need to leave in about 5 to go for dinner. But I guess maybe, yeah, I do find that the setup here is absolutely fascinating, right? Of this perhaps decay of the society, right? That like they pass a point where they go into this, like the Romulan supernova bit is the point where they switch into kind of like reterritorialization mode, and it's like clenching the borders, whatever. And now they're able to coherently express things like, oh, an us versus them sort of attitude and stuff, and then, but also then facing this kind of like other more nebulous internal threat or boundary crossing threat of like AIs and stuff, and the kind of like, I guess it's like that kind of biopolitics kind of stuff, right? Of like having to like legislate legitimate organism and legitimate expressions of life and so on, at a really fundamental level, which is again that kind of Blade Runner trick as well, of like, is your DRM up to date on your fucking like your bioorganism stuff, and the notion that the Federation would be in this process of transition into a very different kind of society, one that's like clenching its way into oblivion if the future bit, like the going forward 1,000 years, is to be believed, right? Like it's in the process of beginning to destroy itself through this action, right? I guess it's like a thing like Now Appreciate will probably be something that airs later, but was recorded quite a bit earlier in one of these episodes. But like that notion that, like for Stafford Beer, the whole like the clench reflex is not a response to chaos and instability. The clench is the instability, and it is a manifestation of the chaos. And like this society doing this kind of like clench reflex is the mechanism by which it'll eventually obliterate itself. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it really, that's something I've been saying with S3 for a while. It's like, my hope is what they're doing with Star Trek Picard is that they're setting the stage for why the Federation is dissolved by the time you get to Disco Season 3, which is 1,000 years in the future from TOS era. Or more than 1,000, a couple thousand, whatever it is. And I hope that it's what you're saying and what we talked about in one of our episodes that isn't out yet, about the clench reflex that you see in the DS9 episodes, Paradise Lost and Homefront. Like there's a similar kind of clench reflex to a terrorist attack going on there, and this clench reflex fosters an environment where a conspiracy is hatched to oust the democratically elected president and set up a military dictatorship. And within the utopian society on Earth, and it's put a stop to, and that clench is kind of relaxed as they just prepare for a normal, military conflict and not like a military dictatorship. And it seems like the difference between that and this is that that's a really fast clench that's extra legal, whereas what we know about how the Federation runs from Homefront and Paradise Lost is that they have kind of like a parliament or like a presidential something, democratic and like the liberal tradition, more or less. And the members of the Federation have their own like MPs, basically. It sounds like that the Federation itself has voted to like they're illegal. It's not just like a Starfleet ban, like there's no sense in Starfleet. They're illegal.
Yeah.
And so what I hope that we're seeing the beginning at the end of the Federation. And I also am curious about what the middle phase is like. There is a Star Trek role-playing game called Star Trek Adventures, and there's a podcast that that's doing like a story about it. And in that story, there is a Maddox-type android. Maddox never figured out the positronic neural net, but found like an alternative. And that character is very Data-esque. So it sounds like since they could produce sense more reliably, that they become more common post DS9. Because this story was set post DS9.
Right.
That's not canon, obviously,
Yeah.
but like I'm curious about like
It does
what
seem
that-
like.
yeah, no, it seemed like they had like some sense were pretty common for a while, and then there was an attack, and then they were outlawed. So I think Kyle's next.
I need to bounce out, but it's been wonderful talking to y'all.
Cheers.
See y'all
Bye.
soon.
Thanks
Bye.
for coming.
See ya.
See you, Kyle. Or not Kyle. Shane.
Yeah, so I think like it is interesting to see like that question of sort of like what the fundamental contradiction is in the Federation that causes it to dissolve. And it seems to lie on this line of what is a person, which was brought up in Measure of a Man, and seemingly resolved there, but then, in fact, not actually right? So whatever the ruling of the courts was at that time, it doesn't matter. It's been legislated that it's illegal to produce these kinds of synths anymore. Do we want to talk a little bit about the whole thing we see at the end of the episode, where they're basically building like a Borg cube, it looks like?
Oh, that's so dope. Yeah, they the Romulans reclaimed like a Borg cube. Like, so the Romulan star system is gone. Like, it didn't really like sink in that in the alternate universe J.J. Abrams movies, when they're, you know, showing the destruction of Romulus and stuff, that there's like some sort of, or I think Vulcan, I forget. There's like a parallel event in the actual timeline that counts, which I was very surprised. I enjoyed the JJ stuff, you know, because I was like, this fucking doesn't matter. Who cares? Like, but apparently there's an event that, you know, like actually carries over. And so, yeah, the Romulans are now a diaspora people. They're all over the place. And I guess one of the places they hole up is in a Borg cube, which, you know, I understand, and I haven't seen, but I understand from the end of Voyager that the Borg are essentially not a problem anymore. And so let's we could grab their cubes. What are they using their cubes for? You know, and potentially a lot of the synth technology was built, you know, by Borg technology into, you know, what the Federation had lying around. I don't know how canon that is, but I'm assuming something like that could happen, because they do it all throughout Voyager, like from season 4 onward.
Has there ever been a bad episode of Star Trek with the Borg in it?
Never.
So this bodes very well for the series.
I think you're right.
The greatest creation in Star Trek.
Yeah, I'll let you know if there's any like real turkey Voyager episodes that manage to drag the Borg into it. But yeah, as far as I could tell, not really. Even that really early TNG one where they're like growing a baby in a vat or something, it's still pretty good, you know?
The only one I can think of that's kind of like, but it's not bad, it's just kind of mediocre, is the one where there's a group of rogue Borg that Lore, Data's rebellious evil brother.
Descent.
Yeah.
I love Descent.
I didn't hate it, but
I know what you mean.
I like the regular Borg. I even like the Borg Queen. Rebellious Borg doesn't really move the needle for me as much. But
there's an excellent Voyager episode with a planet of Borg that create their own little cooperative.
I do like that. They're more ex-Borg than like Rogue Borg, right? The ones in Descent are Rogue Borg. But the I like that Voyager episode better, actually. But I was going to say something else. Oh yeah, with 7 of 9 and kind of like some hints sprinkled throughout the trailers, I kind of thought the Borg might be a concern in Picard. But I'm not sure how that's going to work. So I know we said spoilers are on the table, but I'm going to try not to spoil Voyager for you, Esri.
Thanks, babe. Yeah, well, clearly I haven't seen the end of Voyager. But again, like, people out there in Media Land, you may or may not know how that shapes up.
I guess
I can't even remember.
Shrub.
Heck. The other thing too was the Romulans seemed a lot more humanized to me. Like, am I the only one? I couldn't tell at first if the people living with Picard were Romulan or Vulcan. Because Romulans had like the thick brows, not just the pointy, like crazy brows, but like
they weren't as
like they had kind of like a.
They weren't as obviously an Asian like parody.
I think right.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
the implication is that those are Romulans living with Picard, and that the reason why that they are helping take care of him and show so much respect for him is that when the Romulan sun was going nova, this was the guy leading the rescue effort, and he basically he lost his career over it. And it might have been some kind of ploy to outmaneuver the Federation, but the Federation accepted his resignation.
Yeah. He's also established as someone who wants to diplomatically heal the rift between Vulcan and Romulus. There's a whole two-parter where old man Spock, is infiltrating Romulus and trying to start pro-Vulcan study groups or whatever, like a Marxist Capital reading group or something. And they're cover Tasha Yar's daughter, because of weird time travel, blah blah blah.
Time travel.
Yeah, time travel. She is half Romulan, and she uncovers the plot and is trying to get them all fucked up and all that. But in terms of the Picard series, there's some precedent for Picard trying to have a positive relationship with Romulans, and this is really kind of the culmination of that. But it seems like in this story, Romulans are both going to be antagonistic and support cast, it seems like, because clearly some of the Romulans are just resentful and are just trying to kill all the synths. Now, we don't know for sure if this is only a Romulan, Tal Shiar, I believe they're called, the CIA, Romulan CIA, basically. We don't know if this is a Tal Shiar thing or if this is a joint effort. I think you meant kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but during that first fight sequence, I was wondering if these were Federation agents, if they were Section 31, or if they were just regular Starfleets who were trying to stop synths because they're illegal.
It definitely seems like an elaboration on the Black Ops tendencies of the Tal Shiar and Section 31. It wouldn't surprise me if it was some sort of joint project or something. But we don't have that much to go on about them, except for seeing that one of them were Romulan, and then that early conversation where they're
right, where were their universal translators? Can they not fit a universal translator in their special spacesuits?
They're just trying to obey Trek canon by being terribly inconsistent about universal translators.
Did they explicitly say they were Romulans? Because I thought they were Vulcan when I was watching.
Pointy ears, eyebrows. That's the problem with the Romulan redesigns, though. It's harder to tell them apart.
Yeah. I'm getting a little bit of echo. I don't know what that is. I think the implication that I'm sorry. We're talking about the police officers, or or Picard's help.
Police officers. I think that's what Tom was asking about.
Yeah, the Black Ops guys. Okay.
And also the guy at the end who was on the Borg cube. Was he explicitly?
Yes, he was explicitly Romulan, because that was a Romulan reclamation site.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I think basically whenever we see someone that could probably be a Vulcan at this stage of the show, they all seem it just makes sense to think of them as Romulans. I have no idea how they'll actually depict the differences or how many Vulcans we'll actually get. I have no idea what happens to Vulcan in this universe. The idea that JJ Trek has canonical resonance is not something I like that much. So, we'll see.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, so I think it is interesting that the Romulans have been redesigned. It kind of suggests that a lot of the markers we associate with the Romulans were very cultural, and that culture has fallen apart. But I kind of am a little on the fence about the way that they're played so far, it's like they kind of like they don't seem to have any strong identity. So I mean, it's like I kind of like the problematizing of the like, oh, Romulans are a bunch of arrogant assholes.
Yeah. One planet,
trope.
one race, one characteristic. Got
Yeah,
it.
exactly. But it's also like, so why are the Vulcans all the same, but the Romulans are just kind of like more or less humans with some funky facial features? So yeah, so that's something that I kind of look forward to see how it turns out on the show, because I think there is some interesting potential there. Also, like, didn't like the dude who shows up at the end of the episode, like his clothing looked almost like Spock from Discovery, right? I was like, is that Spock? It's like, no, it's just it's a guy who's cosplaying as Spock. Okay, got it. Yeah, sorry, I'm steering this back towards media critique, but I in terms of the thematics, I am interested to see, like, as you said, how Picard's faith in the Romulans kind of like plays out over this series, because there is a lot of setup for that in TNG, and they are carrying that through in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think kind of the comment on like the Romulan versus Vulcan in this series, I think the only way we could really tell them apart is that Romulans have really like way more pronounced eyebrows, but they don't have the thicker brow ridges. And then the thing that I wasn't sure at all if they were Romulan or Vulcan, it really could have gone either way until one of them cracked like a subtle joke. Vulcans rarely do that. And I think to kind of answer Kyle's question about what makes Vulcans, like why are Romulans like diverse, more individualistic, whereas Vulcans are just like basically all the same. I think that has to do with Vulcans' emotions, like, and their almost religious reverence for logic. Vulcans canonically have like way more intense emotions than humans ever could have, and they kept like blowing each other up and fighting and killing each other over these emotions, and so they developed this like religious, like almost a French Revolution kind of like cult of logic, basically.
Yeah.
And they have this like very disciplined regimen, like belief structure and logic to keep these emotions under control. So like a planet-wide religious reverence for logic is what makes Vulcans seem all very similar. And so I think it's hard to tell from like the quick little screen grabs you get from the trailers, but there's a character who looks like he could be either Vulcan or Romulan with like a sword and like doing like samurai shit. He looks like he's Vulcan to me. And I think one of the things is like he has more subtle eyebrows is the way I could kind of tell.
Sure.
But I do, and then going back to like the last scene, it seems what the trailers are setting up is that the whatever special ops is targeting these androids, they kind of realize that a direct attack isn't necessarily the best way to go about it. Like, they by attacking, oh god, what's her name? I don't want to say Dijon. Daj, thank you. Sorry, I have bad memory. Daj, when she was attacked, she immediately like activated her android mode, kicked on, and she just fucked them up. They did get kind of lucky with the second time they attacked her, but I think they realized like doing a subtle, like, kind of approach with these androids is better, because it seems like he tries to develop like a romance with her and then tries to get closer to like offer without her realizing. So
yeah, that seems to be the thing, because that guy approaches her with like, hey, oh, my brother just died. I really miss him. Hey, what's going on in your life? Knowing full well that, probably knowing full well that her sister was just killed by, shock troopers, or just went missing and no one knows. That was a really devastating scene, actually. These action scenes are quite good. And that one was, all of the action and darkness that they were trying to like shoehorn into Disco really hard, like, and it kind of maybe didn't work so well, culminating in the fridging of a, you know, but like of a character they're patting themselves on the back for so much. There's like most of the action and dark stuff in this was a lot more tasteful, even though it gets real dark and even though there's a lot of like breakneck action. Maybe the exception is that they fridged a black guy right at the beginning. You know, nobody has to do that. You know, if you're making a new series, a new Star Trek series, and you just introduce like a black character or dude of color, you don't have to fridge him right away. Let's just, you know, notes for the new Trek shows. Hopefully they won't just fridge a black guy right in the beginning of the new Star Trek cartoon coming out. Like, just you know, these are free notes for anyone, you know, in the Trek production team watching. I'm here because they don't have enough people giving free criticism. Let me turn back to canon. So, okay, like, yes, every time you see somebody that looks like a Vulcan, and they do read as Vulcans to me, and they probably read as Vulcans to lots of people, I'm just going to say probably Romulan. Now, the one thing about Romulans, they're one, like, you know, racial essential trait that you get through TNG. And I think in Voyager, I think this also carries over, is that they're so sneaky, devious, and that, like, you know, they prefer to work with deception. I don't know if they have it like a Mirror Universe French Revolution, you know, cult of deception kind of thing. But, you know, it could be pretty funny if they did. Vulcans do have this, you know, universe that like encompasses their planet and guides their people as a whole. Now, the Romulans might have had something like that, but they're diaspora people now. Their home is gone. And that probably accounts for, you know, in Star Trek logic, where a planet is a culture, is a characteristic. You know, they don't have their essence anymore. They're post-essence people. Their one thing that nails down their essence has been blown up. Their star system, whatever universal religion of deception tied them all together, is now, you know, the material roots for that are gone. And so now, you know, a bunch of them are shock troopers. A bunch of them are like Mediterranean wine moms and stuff. Like, whatever. Like, there's no more essence to the people. They blew up the sun went nova.
On top of losing their essence by losing their planet, it seems like all their shoulder pads that they used to wear was blown up on the planet. Like, did all Romulan shoulder pads get blown up too? Like, what's the deal with that? Like, why are there no shoulder pads? I'm really upset.
It was one of the conditions when they were taking refugee on Earth. That they had
no more shoulder pads. That's the 80s.
Their wardrobe, way too 80s, too dynasty.
Yeah, and the thing about like there being helpful Romulans, like I said in TMG, they're super sneaky. In Deep Space Nine, they're pretty sneaky, but over the course of the Dominion War arc, they help. They become, you know, partners. And yes, it's like a Soviet situation where they're worried about the end of the war and what are those Romulans gonna do? But like, they're still an ally in that. And then in Star Trek Nemesis, when Picard Claude Billy Corgan leads an uprising of the Dark Elves, aka the Remans, which is really, really bad, like, you know, hot topic design there. Like, the Romulans also come to the aid of of Captain Picard. So I don't know. There's precedent for this. There's precedent for all the twists and turns they're doing with the Romulans.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, like, when we're talking about the, like, sort of racial essentialism or species essentialism of Trek, like, it's true that the Vulcans do the logic thing to deal with their intense emotionality, right? But the whole thing about the Romulans is that they were the ones who broke off from the Vulcans and were like, nah, we're going to go all in on the emotions. Right. We're going to be like a bad, like, Roman melodrama, or like basically like
a solid point.
1950s like Hollywood vision of what Rome was like. So passionate and mischievous and stabbing each other in the back all the time.
Right. Basically,
screw your logic.
Antecedents to Caligula, the film.
Right? Yeah. So it's. I guess I'm glad they've moved away from biotruths, but also we don't see any evidence of the Romulans having any of those traits that were previously established. So whatever. I mean, we'll see how this plays out.
I kind of wonder what the Romulan government is like post planet. Is there a provisional government? Is it just pure diaspora where there's no central Romulan authority besides maybe some holdovers of a military apparatus that makes up what is left of the Tal Shiar, which is doing this android assassination. I'm kind of with Esri in that I think this is probably going to be a joint effort kind of thing, as it turns out. I think the Romulan ears from the couple of faces we got from the shock troopers are a purposeful misdirection. You just happen to get the two Romulan people. And the, hey, speak English thing earlier was also hinting at that, even though bad continuity. But the Romulus was incredibly Roman, so much so that they basically had a fascistic government, if not outright fascist. And basically the kind of resistance that you had on Romulus, led by Spock and supported by Picard, was kind of a democratic based movement to have basic bourgeois liberties, so it's essentially as a starting point, and normalizing relations with Vulcan, and by extension the Federation. And so it kind of makes me wonder if what they're setting up here with the Romulan shock troopers and that guy at the end versus Picard's friends and Picard sticking up for the Romulans is that there's kind of two competing provisional governments or two competing factions for the Romulan diaspora that are going to be in tension. You know what I mean? And I hope that they kind of develop that, because it seems like they're setting it up. So, I don't know. Thoughts?
I think the way that could be interesting, I think you're totally right. That probably is the setup. The way that could be interesting is if it kind of calls into question the territoriality of the Federation, who fits in, who doesn't, that kind of stuff. Because I mean that whole thing about that they were Romulan lives on the news, it suggests there's a sort of xenophobia within the Federation, and then sort of having that diaspora within that space. I mean, it could bring up some interesting questions about who belongs.
Yeah.
Right. You know what this immediately made me thought of? Your comments, Kyle? I bet you that the Romulan story arc with the diaspora is going to be an analogy for refugees.
It already is.
That's true. But that didn't jump out at me when I first watched it, because...
Really? Okay.
Well, there was just so much going on with synths, and then the Romulans, and then Picard, and Data, and blah, 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 blah. So... But
you're just a bit slow, Sophie. You're just a bit slow.
Shut up, Tom.
I'm gonna hurt you, Tom. I'm gonna phaser you. I'm gonna phaser you on the gore setting, just make you evaporate.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I didn't. It didn't jump out at me at first, but I think I guess that is pretty obvious. But I wonder how they're going to develop that. There's always the concern that Star Trek is going to be a bit ham-fisted. But I think being ham-fisted about refugees rather than being ham-fisted about Orange Man bad is tremendously better. I think it is incredibly fucked up what's going on right now, and being turning towards the camera and being this is fucked up, y'all, isn't necessarily a bad move. It might make for bad TV, but I don't know. I really am curious about what the governmental situation is with Romulus, and also how is that going to play out with their relationship to the Federation,
Well, that seems like a pretty good place to leave off. We have some lovely comments from our YouTube chat. Right now we are simulcasting through Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. Thanks everyone for showing up. If you really liked us, then go to the other channels and register your enjoyment there if you can. That's great. But we're gonna pop in YouTube because it's the easiest one to be like beep. Let's see. So we have some canon answers from Hermetical about Picard's pancake ass. Once you leave Starfleet, arson plans are removed. Thank you, Hermetical. And Natalia elaborates that ass is the defining characteristic of Star Trek overall. Without it, we're just left with a cheap knockoff. She's one of these not my Trek types. I would say she's a boomer if I didn't know. She was definitely not.
I think your career in Starfleet is all but guaranteed now, Esri.
Oh man, I'm gonna make full admiralty. I'm gonna get the brainworms and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Really, booty can get you places. Let's see.
Red Squad.
Red Squad. Yeah, Red Squad that wasn't annihilated in an ill-fated Nickelodeon pilot. Let's see. I have course. Okay. Okay. This is in the middle of a conversation about Picard looking old back in the day. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
True facts.
I mean, I think I just mapped the concept of maturity. I extrapolated it from Patrick Stewart, so it's like difficult for me to tease out whether he looked young or old, because to me that's just what being a fully grown person was supposed to be.
What's really interesting when you watch season 1 TNG? He looks like he has sharper features. Like I don't know if he's a little bit more thin or if he's just kind of younger, is more testosterone in his body or something.
Sure.
But like it jumped out at me when I watched like the first episode of TNG.
How about Patrick Stewart as Lennon?
Oh my god!
I haven't watched that yet, but I really want to see
wonderful
that.
portrayal. Yeah, it's why I wanted you to see Fall of Eagles, a lovely BBC miniseries about the end of the Great Mana movies. It's just a really natural. It's a really natural cast decision. It's excellent casting, and it's part of why that this like facepalm Picard bust makes me laugh so hard. It's because it's basically a Lennon bust. Except adjusted for the actual trajectory of things. And let's see. Yeah, we have people that love the cube. Gotta love the cube. There's like a fucking 45-second zoom out shot of the cube. So in a modern show, 45-second shot feels like an eternity. They did a great job.
That's like the modern version of the first Star Trek movie, like 10-minute long panning around the Enterprise shots.
Yeah, adjusted for deflating attention spans. Yeah, totally.
I gotta say too, canonically Romulan architecture is like very gray and bland. And so when they first zoomed out in the reclamation site, I thought it was just like a different planet from Romulus, but they like modernized their technology to make it hyper modernistic and super like square and black and imposing. And then it zooms out. It's like, no, this is even more modernism than Romulus. It is the Borg.
Yeah. Wow. The Romulans really had an architectural revolution in exile. Wow. Very, very creative people, the Romulans.
It's true.
I just like saying the word Borg every so often. I've been saying it. I've been muted, so it hasn't come through. But every so often, I've just been going Borg.
What is that? Swedish?
Borg. It is Swedish.
Yeah.
The tennis player.
Well, I think that just about wraps things up here at Jumpsuit Utopia. We're aiming to do sane length streams, maybe not the 2-hour, 3-hour marathons that our regular streamers, our regular stream audience from our patrons are used to from Emancipation Network. If you're out there, thank you for tuning into those. But more importantly, thank you all for tuning in this time. We'll be back in a week. We'll probably actually start at 1 in a week, but we'll see. Well, we might actually start on time next time. Let's see. Wink.
My fault. My fault. Apologies.
No. There was plenty of things to set up. It was our first run. But I'd like to thank Shane, Kyle, Sophie, and Tom for coming out. And just want to run through the chat. Thanks for Medical and Natalia. And pretty much everybody that talked. Oh wait, why did I do this when I could do this? Live long and prosper. Peace out.
Peace out.
Bye.
Tits.